My landlord tried to evict me for a pet I didn't have, so I bought 10. It all started with a ghost cat, a phantom feline that existed only in the greedy, scheming mind of my landlord, a man so cheap he'd probably charge the dust bunnies under the fridge rent if he could. I didn't own a pet. I barely owned furniture that wasn't held together with hope and duct tape. But his accusation, this fabrication of a furball fiend, was supposed to be the key to him keeping my security deposit. It was a scheme so transparent, so utterly brazen, that it didn't make me angry at first. It just made me tired. But he wasn't counting on one thing. When you back a desperate, research-savvy tenant into a corner, you don't just get a cat, you get an army. The story of my descent into feline-fueled madness begins, as most tales of woe do, with a leaky faucet. Not just any leaky faucet, mind you, but one in the bathroom of my apartment that had a personality. It would drip a slow, maddeningly irregular plank, plank, plank for days. Then, just as I'd grown accustomed to its rhythm, it would switch to a frantic Morse code-like torrent for an hour before falling silent again. I had reported this faucet, along with the mysterious stain spreading across the living room ceiling like a brown, melancholy continent, and the front door lock that required a prayer and a specific 30-degree angle to turn, more times than I could count. Each time, my landlord, a man named Mr. Henderson with the perpetual grimace of someone who just smelled spoiled milk, would promise to get right on it. Right on it, in Henderson speak, I soon learned, meant somewhere between never and when the building collapses. My apartment, a charmingly titled garden-level one-bedroom, was more of a subterranean shoebox with a view of a dumpster and a pervasive scent of damp earth. It was all I could afford on my entry-level salary, and I clung to it like a life raft. The one thing that kept me going was the thought of my security deposit. A full month's rent, $1,500, squirreled away after I moved in. It was my escape fund, my ticket out of this damp, dimly lit purgatory when my lease was up. With only 2 months left, I was meticulously planning my departure, budgeting every penny, dreaming of a place where the plumbing didn't have a secret agenda. That's when the first note appeared. It wasn't taped to my door, which would have been too direct. It was folded into a neat, sharp crease and slid under the door, a paper serpent in my home. The letterhead was stark, just his name and number. The text was typed, cold and impersonal. It was a notice of lease violation. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read it. The violation? Unauthorized pet possession. Specifically, a cat. I read it again, then a third time, the words blurring into a nonsensical jumble. A cat? I didn't have a cat. I didn't have a hamster, a goldfish, or even a particularly robust houseplant. My allergies alone made the very idea of a cat an exercise in self-inflicted torture. I stood in the middle of my living room, turning slowly, as if the phantom feline might materialize from behind the couch. There was nothing. No scratching post, no food bowl, no telltale sprinkle of litter on the floor. The only hair on my clothes was my own. I immediately grabbed my phone and recorded a slow, panoramic video of my entire apartment, narrating my disbelief. As you can see, I said to the silent lens, no cat, no dog, no gerbil, just me, my debt, and this slowly expanding ceiling stain. I sent him an email attaching the video and politely yet firmly stated that there must be some misunderstanding. I had no pet. His reply came within the hour, just as brief and just as chilling. Surprise inspections can be arranged. The lease is clear. No pets. The evidence has been noted. The evidence? What evidence? The ghost cat? The invisible hairball? I knew, with a sinking certainty that settled in my stomach like a stone, that this had nothing to do with a cat. This was about my $1,500. This was Henderson's opening salvo in a war I didn't know I was supposed to be fighting. The days following the first notice were a masterclass in psychological warfare, Henderson style. He didn't respond to my follow-up emails asking for specifics about this so-called evidence. Instead, he began a campaign of low-grade harassment designed to wear me down. It started with him just happening to be in the neighborhood and needing to check the smoke detectors in the building at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning. He'd linger in my doorway, his beady eyes scanning every corner of my small apartment, his nostrils flaring as if trying to sniff out a hidden catnip farm. He'd run his fingers along the windowsill, inspecting for dust, or more likely, for phantom claw marks. Then came the evidence. One afternoon, I came home to find another note under my door. This one was accompanied by a single clear photograph. It was a close-up of the arm of my second-hand couch. In the center of the frame was a tiny, almost imperceptible fray in the upholstery. Underneath the photo, Henderson had scrawled in his aggressive all-caps handwriting, "Claw marks, observed on 10/24." I stared at it, a laugh bubbling up in my throat before dying in a choke of frustration. That fray had been there when I bought the couch from a thrift store 6 months prior. It was less a claw mark and more the sad final gasp of a dying piece of furniture. I took my own photo, this one of the entire couch, showing its general state of disrepair, and sent it to him with a detailed history of the couch's lineage. His response was a new photo, this time of a single, long, dark hair resting on the bathroom rug. Feline hair, sample collected. It was absurd. My own hair was dark. For all he knew, it was one of his own errant eyebrow hairs that had fallen during one of his inspections. I was living in a bad episode of Columbo, except the culprit was imaginary and the detective was a greedy miser. The situation escalated from frustrating to farcical. He began leaving small, saucer-like dishes of water outside my door, then taking pictures of them before I woke up, I assumed to claim I was leaving them out for my spectral pet. He started playing cat meowing sounds from his phone on the other side of my wall late at night, a bizarre and frankly creepy attempt to goad me into some sort of admission. I felt like I was losing my mind. I was constantly on edge, triple-checking that I hadn't accidentally brought a cat home from the grocery store. I'd find myself staring at a shadow on the wall, half expecting it to meow. The stress was immense. I wasn't sleeping. The constant threat of eviction, of losing my deposit and my housing reference, loomed over me like the ominous ceiling stain. I knew I couldn't reason with him. Logic and proof were useless against a man who had already convicted me in his own court of imaginary animal cruelty. He was building a case, a paper trail of fabricated violations, and I was terrified it was going to work. The final blow came a week later. It wasn't a note this time. It was an official-looking document handed to me by a process server as I was leaving for work. An unlawful detainer notice. He was suing to evict me for a cat that didn't exist. The game had changed, and I was about to lose everything. The unlawful detainer notice felt like a physical weight in my hand. The legal jargon swam before my eyes, but the meaning was brutally clear. I had 30 days to vacate the premises or face formal eviction proceedings. This wasn't just about my security deposit anymore. An eviction on my record would be a scarlet letter, making it nearly impossible to rent a decent apartment for years. I was cornered. The initial anger had long since curdled into a cold, hard knot of fear in my gut. I spent the first 24 hours in a state of shock, scrolling through apartment listings I couldn't afford and legal aid websites with waiting lists miles long. I felt completely powerless. A tiny bug about to be crushed under the heel of a slumlord's polished, cheap leather shoe. But then something shifted. As I sat in the dim light of my apartment, surrounded by the evidence of Henderson's campaign, a photo of a couch fray, a picture of a single hair, the water saucer still sitting outside my door, the fear began to morph into something else. It was a slow burn, a quiet, simmering rage. He wasn't just trying to steal my money, he was trying to ruin my life over a lie. He was counting on me being too scared, too broke, and too beaten down to fight back. He was banking on my powerlessness. And in that moment, I decided I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. If he was going to drag me into a fight, I was going to hit back with everything I had. I didn't have money for a high-powered lawyer, but I had something else. I had a laptop, an internet connection, and an almost pathological ability to fall down research rabbit holes. My quest began not with tenant rights, but with the root of the problem: pets. I started Googling things like landlord false pet accusation and eviction for fake cat. The results were a mixed bag of forum posts and legal articles, but one phrase kept popping up: emotional support animal. I'd heard the term before, of course, but I'd always filed it away in my brain as something vaguely related to service dogs and airport peacocks. I clicked on a link to the Department of Housing and Urban Development HUD website, and there it was: the Fair Housing Act. It stated that landlords must provide reasonable accommodation for tenants with disabilities, which included allowing emotional support animals, even in buildings with a no pets policy. The animal didn't need special training. The key was a letter from a licensed mental health professional stating the animal provided therapeutic support for a diagnosed condition. I read the page again, and then a third time. My mind started to race. The constant stress, the anxiety, the sleepless nights caused by Henderson's campaign of harassment, weren't those real? The feeling of dread every time I came home, the panic when I saw a note under the door, wasn't that a genuine impact on my mental health? It was. It absolutely was. He had created the conditions, and the law, in its beautiful, ironic wisdom, provided a way out. A plan, audacious and utterly insane, began to form in my mind. It started as a flicker of an idea, a whisper of what if, but it quickly grew into a roaring fire. If he wanted a cat so badly he was willing to invent one, I was going to give him a cat. Not just one cat. I was going to lean into the absurdity of his accusation. I was going to weaponize his own lie against him. I was going to give him a reason to complain about pets, a reason that was 100% legal and completely untouchable. I looked around my empty, quiet apartment, the space that was supposed to be my sanctuary but had become my prison, and I smiled for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just found the rulebook and was about to memorize the chapter on loopholes. The first step in my grand, slightly unhinged plan was to make it official. I needed the letter. I spent the next evening researching online mental health services that specialized in emotional support animal evaluations. I found a reputable-looking site that offered consultations with licensed therapists. I filled out the initial forms with painstaking honesty. I described my living situation, the constant anxiety, the feeling of being watched and harassed in my own home. I wrote about the phantom cat, the fake evidence, the sleepless nights, and the crushing weight of the eviction notice. I didn't have to exaggerate. The truth was already a pretty compelling case for emotional distress. The sheer absurdity of the situation was a source of anxiety in itself. A few days later, I had a video call with a kind-eyed therapist who listened patiently as I laid out the whole saga. When I was finished, she nodded slowly, a look of genuine sympathy on her face. She confirmed that the level of stress and anxiety I was experiencing was a significant issue, and that, in her professional opinion, the companionship of an emotional support animal could be a highly beneficial part of my treatment plan. We discussed the responsibilities of owning an ESA, and by the end of the call, I felt a sense of validation I hadn't expected. It wasn't just a loophole to me anymore, it was a legitimate solution to a real problem. 2 days later, a PDF arrived in my inbox. It was printed on official letterhead, signed and dated. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that I, Nathan, was under their care, and that an emotional support animal was a necessary accommodation for my well-being. It was my golden ticket, my get-out-of-jail-free card, my weapon. The next step was the fun part. Armed with my official letter, I didn't just email it to Henderson, I printed 3 copies. One I hand-delivered to his mailbox, one I taped to the inside of my door in case he tried to enter again, and the third I kept for my records. Then I opened a new tab on my browser and searched for animal shelters near me. The first result was for the city's main animal control and rescue center. I spent an hour looking through their online gallery of available cats, scrolling past picture after picture of sad, hopeful faces. I wasn't looking for a kitten. I was looking for a kindred spirit, a soul who understood what it was like to be down on their luck. That's when I saw him. A large, marmalade-colored tomcat with one ear that was slightly folded over and a look of profound, world-weary judgment in his green eyes. His name was Jasper, and his bio said he was a mellow, older gentleman who enjoys quiet contemplation and sunny spots. He was perfect. He was the anti-phantom. The next day, I went to the shelter. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and the barking of dogs from a distant wing. I filled out the paperwork, and when they asked for the reason for adoption, I simply handed them a copy of my ESA letter. The volunteer's eyes widened slightly, but she just nodded and processed the application. They brought Jasper out in a cardboard carrier. He didn't meow or fuss, he just sat there, a heavy, calming presence. As I carried him to my car, I felt a strange mix of emotions: excitement, nervousness, and a burgeoning sense of power. This was it, the first shot in my war of passive-aggressive attrition. I wasn't just bringing home a cat, I was bringing home a legally protected four-legged middle finger to my landlord's entire scheme. As I drove home, with Jasper occasionally shifting in his carrier beside me, I glanced at the rearview mirror. I saw a tired but determined man, a man who was about to turn his prison into a sanctuary, whether his landlord liked it or not. Bringing Jasper home was like introducing a single lit match into a room full of fireworks. He explored the apartment with a slow, deliberate gait, his tail giving a single authoritative flick as he inspected the baseboards, the underside of the couch, and the mysterious stain on the ceiling. He claimed his new territory not with destruction, but with an air of quiet ownership. Within an hour, he had found the single sunbeam that managed to pierce the gloom of my living room window, and was sprawled in it, bathing in its warmth as if he'd lived there his entire life. It was, I had to admit, incredibly calming. The constant knot of anxiety in my stomach had loosened just a little. Of course, it wasn't long before Henderson made his appearance. I heard his shuffling footsteps outside my door, followed by a sharp, deliberate knock. I opened it to find him standing there, his face a mask of smug triumph. He was holding his phone, poised to record. "I've got you now," he started, his voice dripping with venom. "I heard you come in. I know you've got a..." His voice trailed off as his eyes darted past me and landed on the large orange cat now sitting calmly in the middle of my living room rug, grooming a paw with an air of utter indifference. Henderson's jaw went slack. The smug look on his face was replaced by pure, unadulterated shock. It was a beautiful sight. "Aha!" he finally managed to sputter, raising his phone. "Proof! I knew it! You're evicted! You're gone!" I didn't say a word. I simply turned, walked to my kitchen counter, picked up the official-looking letter, and handed it to him. He snatched it from my hand, his eyes scanning the document with growing disbelief. I watched as his face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, dawning horror, and finally a deep, purplish rage. He looked from the letter to me, then to the cat, then back to the letter, as if trying to solve a puzzle that was making his head hurt. This is a joke," he stammered. "You can't just... This doesn't count." "Emotional support animal," I said, my voice level and calm, "prescribed by a licensed therapist for the anxiety and stress caused by a hostile living environment. It's all in the letter. The Fair Housing Act says you have to accommodate him. You can't charge me a pet fee, and you certainly can't evict me for him. He's not a pet, he's treatment." Henderson looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. He opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water, but no words came out. He had built his entire case on a lie, and I had just bulldozed it with the truth, backed by federal law. He was powerless. He crumpled the letter in his fist, turned on his heel, and stormed away down the hallway, muttering to himself. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a long, slow breath. Jasper looked up from his grooming, gave a soft "murr," and went back to his paw. Round one had gone to me. But as I looked around my still mostly empty apartment, I knew this was just the beginning. One cat was a defense, but what I needed was an offense. I needed to make him regret the day he ever invented a ghost cat. I needed an army. The victory with Jasper was sweet, but it was defensive. It had stopped his immediate attack, but it didn't secure my long-term victory or my security deposit. Henderson, beaten but not defeated, retreated into a new strategy of passive aggression. He stopped the direct confrontations, but the small annoyances intensified. The emergency inspections became more frequent, always at inconvenient times. He'd forget to tell me he was shutting off the water for repairs. He started sending notices about things like excessive noise from movement, which was a bold-faced lie, as I was a homebody and Jasper was the quietest creature on Earth. He was trying to find a new angle, a new way to make my life miserable enough that I'd just leave. So I escalated. If he was going to accuse me of having a cat, I decided I'd give him a menagerie. My plan was no longer just about self-preservation. It was about creating an environment so utterly, legally, and comically overrun with cats that he would beg me to leave. Over the next 3 weeks, I became a fixture at the city animal shelter. I didn't just adopt cats, I curated a collection. I wasn't looking for purebreds or kittens. I was looking for the overlooked, the misunderstood, the cats with personalities that would make Henderson's life a living hell. My second recruit was a tiny, wiry black cat named Shadow, who had a habit of hiding in the most inconvenient places and darting out between people's legs. The third was a massive, fluffy gray Maine Coon mix called Gandalf, who looked like a small lion and had a deep, rumbling purr that could be heard through the walls. Then came the twins, two sleek, identical Siamese mixes named Peanut Butter and Jelly, who communicated with each other in a series of loud, conversational yowls at all hours. By the time I was done, I had adopted 9 cats. 9! Each one came with its own vet records, its own personality, and its own implicit protection under my ESA letter, which I had amended to include multiple animals to ensure I was fully covered. My apartment was transformed. The once dreary space was now a chaotic, vibrant, and surprisingly clean feline paradise. Cat trees towered in the corners. Scratching posts, strategically placed, offered an alternative to the already ruined couch. Litter boxes, kept meticulously clean, were tucked away out of sight. Food and water stations were set up in the kitchen. The air, which once smelled of damp earth, now smelled of, well, cat, but a clean, well-cared-for cat smell. It was the sight and sound that was truly magnificent. It was a whirlwind of fur. A calico sunbathed on the windowsill, a tabby chased a laser pointer dot across the floor, Gandalf the lion cat supervised from the top of the refrigerator. It was loud, it was chaotic, and it was 100% legal. Henderson would walk past my door and just stand there, listening to the symphony of meows, purrs, and the occasional thud of a cat jumping off something. He was a prisoner in his own building, tormented by the very thing he had falsely accused me of having. The final move-in date was approaching. I knew he was waiting, thinking he could still find a way to keep my deposit. He had no idea what I had waiting for him. The last day of my lease arrived. The apartment was packed into boxes, save for the cats and their essential equipment. My friends, who had been in on the plan and found it hysterically brilliant, helped me load the last of my belongings into a moving truck. They also came to pick up most of the cats, who had already been promised new, loving homes with them. I was only keeping 2. Jasper, my stoic orange companion, and Peanut Butter, the loud, opinionated Siamese who had grown on me. As the last of my feline army departed, the apartment felt strangely empty and quiet. Henderson arrived for the final walkthrough right on schedule, a smug, predatory grin plastered on his face. He was holding a clipboard and a pen, ready to document every imaginary flaw. He was certain he had me. He walked in, his eyes scanning the room, and his smile faltered for a second. The apartment was spotless. It was cleaner than when I had moved in. The floors were mopped, the surfaces were wiped down, and the air was fresh. The only signs of the recent feline occupation were the temporary scratch marks on the doorframe, which were covered by the ESA provisions for reasonable wear and tear from a necessary accommodation. "Well," he said, trying to regain his composure, "looks like you and your little zoo finally cleared out. I hope you're ready to forfeit your deposit. The damage, the smell, the sheer audacity of it all. It's going to cost a fortune to fix." He started scribbling on his clipboard, making a show of it. I didn't say a word. I just calmly walked over to my kitchen table, where a thick 3-ring binder was waiting. I placed it on the table with a soft thud that seemed to echo in the quiet room. Henderson looked up, annoyed. "What's that?" "That," I said, opening the binder to the first page, "is my counteroffer." The first page was a copy of my official amended ESA letter, now covering multiple animals. Behind it was a printout of the relevant sections of the Fair Housing Act, with key phrases highlighted in yellow. The next section contained printouts of every email and note he had ever sent me about the phantom cat, creating a clear paper trail of his harassment. After that were vet records for all 9 cats, proving they were healthy, vaccinated, and well cared for. Then came photos of the apartment during my tenancy, showing the pre-existing damage like the couch fray and the ceiling stain, followed by photos of the spotless, move-out ready apartment. The final section was a printout of state landlord-tenant law, detailing the severe penalties for wrongfully withholding a security deposit, including triple damages and attorney's fees. I watched as Henderson's face went from smug to pale. He flipped through the binder, his hand trembling slightly. He saw the documentation, the legal precedent, the meticulous record-keeping. He saw that not only would he lose if he tried to keep my deposit, but I could sue him into oblivion and report him to every housing authority in the state. He started, his voice a hoarse whisper. He looked at the binder, then at me, and the fight just drained out of him. He knew he was beaten, utterly and completely. "I'll have the deposit transferred to your account by the end of the day," he said, his eyes fixed on the floor. I nodded, slowly closing the binder. "I thought you might see it my way." I picked up Jasper's carrier and my last box, and without another word, I walked out of that apartment for the last time. A week later, the full $1,500 was in my bank account. I had won. I hadn't just gotten my money back. I had defended my home, my sanity, and my rights against a bully who thought he could get away with it. And as I settled into my new, brighter, cat-friendly apartment with Jasper and Peanut Butter, I realized that sometimes the best way to fight a monster is to give him exactly what he wants, only more of it, and with a legally binding prescription.